Welcome back to Off Ball Takes. This is your host, your RB Laws, and this is my co-host.
For Wells.
We appreciate everyone who came through for our live stream on Wednesday. We'll be having another live discussion stream Friday following the game 4 of the finals. So please come through because we had some pretty good discussions in the last one due to our viewers. But before we get started, please don't forget to like and subscribe and follow us on Instagram and Twitter at the OBT Podcast for updates.
Yep. And also just a quick update. So, the interview we are going to be pushing back to a future episode. Just due to some technical difficulties going on. But we will have it. It's just we're going to have to probably push it back just to a later date. But it's going to be relatively soon. But just wanted to throw that out there just in case people were wondering, what was going on with this, the potential interview. But I just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah.
Um, But I guess to get into our first topic, obviously we have to discuss game three between the Nuggets and the Heat in the NBA Finals. Right. This one, we kind of talked about it on the live stream, right? But it was a relatively close game at halftime.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And then after the third quarter, right, then the Nuggets ran away with it, ended up winning by 15, 109 to 94, go up 2-1 in the series. This game was pretty much led by their two stars, their two best players, right?
Mm-hmm.
Nikola Jokic, right, with 32 points, 21 rebounds, 10 assists, 12 of 21 from the field, 1 of 2 from three, 7 of 8 from the line. Jamal Murray, right, also with a 34-point triple double of his own, 34, 10, and 10. Getting that 10th rebound right at the end of the game,
Yeah.
just to make sure he could get that stat. But then after that, not really a whole lot else. In the starting five, Aaron Gordon chipped in with 10 rebounds, 7 defensive, 3 offensive, 5 assists, and 11 points. So a pretty solid all around game, but not a ton in terms of scoring. Caldwell Pope played pretty poorly,
Yeah.
right? 6 points, 1 of 4 from the field, 0 of 3 from 3. Michael Porter Jr. The defensive effort was there, rebounding was there, right? But didn't really get much else out of him, especially, considering he's on a max contract. You'd like to get a little bit more than 2 points and 7 rebounds.
Right.
Um, but after that, the next big guy was Christian Brown coming off the bench as a rookie with 15 points, 4 rebounds, 1 assist, 1 steal. A lot of that in the fourth quarter. Um, right, because the Nuggets went up, I believe, by as much as 19 towards the end of the third, and then Miami made a quick 5-0 run to get it back to a more manageable 14-point lead. And then Christian Brown kind of took over at different points in the fourth quarter. Attacking the zone, getting it done on the defensive end, right? Because we saw in this game some of the things that Denver did. We saw Michael Porter Jr.'s minutes drop, right? Because again, when he's not scoring, even though again he can get after it on the boards at times and close out, he's not going to be playing as much when he's not scoring.
Sure.
Um, but again, Christian Brown kind of came in to fill that hole. What was kind of interesting was that in this game, you didn't really have a ton of guys, like I said, for Denver play well, right? Even guys like Bruce Brown. The defense was fine with 3 blocks, right? But 1 of 5 from the field.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Jeff Green gave them 4 points, 1 assist, right? So not really much there. Right. Reggie Jackson, we saw him randomly come in for a minute towards the end of the first. I don't really know what that was about. Maybe just to get another ball handler playmaker in there, but
Right.
didn't really do much of anything. He hadn't really been in the rotation anyways. Even though he was a guy that was kind of looked at as a decent acquisition at the in during the buyout market, but he hasn't been a part of their rotation pretty much at all since the early part of when he was first there. But this game, like I said, was definitely led by their stars. We saw Denver um, do some more dribble handoffs with Jokic and Murray, right, as opposed to pick and roll one on one, right, which Miami had a tougher time stopping, right, because a big thing in game two was Jimmy Butler being able to guard Jamal Murray in a lot of these spots, right? Kind of, just being a bigger body with long arms, with a lot of strength and length, being able to kind of just, hold him off and stop him. But with the handoffs, right, he's got to chase him around. It's a lot harder to do, especially when Murray's a tough, scorer off the dribble. And that was kind of, again, like, with Miami, we look at their stats, right? Other than their stars, right? Jimmy and Bam, not much else, right? Butler at 28 and 4, 11 of 24. But some of that I feel like was when the game was kind of over. So I feel
Sure.
like his numbers look a little bit better than how he actually played. He was aggressive in terms of his, shot attempts, right? But it just wasn't there. Bam at 22 and 17 with 3 assists and a block. He had a solid game. Obviously, offensively, he kind of, it went away down the stretch. But again, it's a tough task to have to try to stay in front of and guard Jokic while also having to contribute offensively. But they're
Right.
giving him a lot of those shots. And to his credit, he's been able to take and make a lot of them. So he's had a really good series. But after that, Kevin Love, 2 of 5, 6 points, 2 boards. Gabe Vincent, 2 of 10, 7 points. 1 of 6 from three. Got 3 early fouls in the first half, which really hurt what he was able to do.
Yeah.
Max Strus, more like game one Max Strus, right? 1 of 7, 1 of 4 from three, 3 points. And then after that, right, no one else other than, I guess Caleb Martin, right, 10 points off the bench, 4 of 9, right, but hasn't really gotten going like he did against Boston. And then Duncan Robinson with a relatively muted game. He had 9 points, but I think a couple of those were when the game, like I said, was basically out of reach.
Yeah.
Um, so that was kind of the difference there was Denver's stars were the main catalyst for Denver in this game. And, they were the big contributors and they played great. And, Miami Stars were okay, right? But they can be better. But their supporting cast didn't play well at all. And that's kind of the difference, right? Denver's floor, I think, is higher than Miami's because their two stars, their two best players, just do a lot more on the offensive end. And again, like Butler and Bam, it's kind of fascinating, right? Because you don't, Jokic and Murray aren't necessarily two-way stars. I think Jokic's defense has improved, right? But no one would still call him a great defender, right? He's a
Right.
very good defensive rebounder, right? Which is important because you got to be able to, finish defensive possessions by, getting being active on the boards.
Yeah.
Um, and he had a couple of blocks, right? Because he does at times, in terms of the team defense, right? He'll position himself, he'll help out. So it's not like he's definitely no longer a defensive liability, not at this point anymore. He's
Right.
acceptable, I think, defensively, right?
Sure.
But obviously for him, it's his offense that puts him over the top. Because we know that there are other stars that aren't great defenders, right? But because their offensive games are, incredibly high level, you don't really necessarily look at their defense, right? Like Luca is another example where
Yeah.
he's not a great defender whatsoever, right? But his offense, because it's so otherworldly, you kind of look the other way.
Right.
Um,
I think
and
that's the
that's
case
kind of
with a
what it
lot
is.
of players.
Exactly. And with that duo, again, when they're clicking like that offensively, it's really tough to stop because again, you can play great defense on those guys and it doesn't matter, right? Because again, I thought that they guarded Jokic and Murray. I mean, they hit some really tough shots. Right. But with Jokic, this is just kind of what he does now, where, it seems like it hasn't mattered who's been guarding him, right? It could be Bam. We saw AD, right? Those two guys are very high level defensive bigs, and it didn't matter. For the most part, he had his way with those guys, right? And Jamal Murray, right, has, had his way this game against the Heat, even with, some of the bigger physical guards that Miami has, compared to, say, some of LA's guys. Um, and to me, that was kind of the difference here is that that's the tough part for Miami is that, that Jokic and Jamal Murray, right? The bad versions of those guys are still probably better offensively than, when Butler and Bam are really struggling.
Sure.
Murray wasn't good at all, in my opinion, in game two. I think he had like 18, but again, like to me, a couple of those shots were, like I said, I know Denver had a chance to get back in, but, like for most of the game, he was not effective at all.
Yeah.
Um, but like I said, Denver made those adjustments with the dribble handoffs. They did a much better job of attacking that zone that Miami, slowed them down with in game two, right, where they got to the paint. And that was kind of what happened with Christian Brown, right? Because unlike, Michael Porter Jr. was settling for a lot of tough jumpers, but Christian Brown was getting to the basket, right? Not settling for jumpers, being aggressive on defense. Denver got to the line a ton. And again, that's the difference is Denver's floored off, especially offensively, is much higher than Miami's, right? Because we
Oh
saw like
yeah.
Denver, like they played fine. I feel like I feel like we've seen better versions of Denver than we saw in game three, right? Because
Hmm.
again, it was basically Jokic and Jamal Murray for most of the game. Three wasn't falling, but they were still efficient, shot over 50%. But Miami's offense was awful, right? 37 from the field, 31 from three. As I mentioned, a number of guys that shot really poorly. I mean, outside of Butler and Bam, right? The rest of your starters were combined, what, 5 for I think 22, right?
Hmm.
Which again, that's an incredibly low percentage. I mean, I think that's under 25%. So
Yeah.
you're talking about some really, you know, rough shooting splits for a lot of these guys. And again, you also have to credit Denver's defense because I think the defensive attention and effort was much better in game three than it was in game two. Michael Malone, called them out at the end of the game, at the end of game two. Chris Haynes reported that Jokic had a big speech after game two to try to, kind of get the team behind everybody. And we saw, like I said, better defensive effort. Miami wasn't getting as many open looks as they had gotten the first two games, right? So that's the tough part for Miami is that, again, they have to generate good offense and they have to be pretty consistent offensively because, again, when you look at Miami, they shot really poorly, right? But they took care of the ball. They only had 4 turnovers, right? But Denver was still able to get out in transition because every time Miami had a, rough miss, Denver was out and running. And, that's kind of the unfortunate part with Miami is that they have to, you know, play, in my opinion, close to perfect basketball, for them in order to win, right? Because they did it in the fourth quarter of game 2, which they had to do, right? Because if they didn't have the historic fourth quarter where I think they had 29 points in the first 8 minutes, right? They'd be down 3-0.
Yeah,
Um,
true.
so that's kind of the thing here, right? And Denver now has taken back home court advantage. Um, but now game 4 is, in a way, I think, again, like we saw in other series, the swing game where if Denver wins game 4, right, then the series is pretty much done, right? Denver's going to be up 3-1 going back to Denver. And I don't think they're going to lose 3 in a row, right? We saw a
No,
bunch of other teams, right, that were down 3-1 or, 3-0, and they didn't come back, even though
right.
people thought they were going to come back. But no, that didn't happen. That doesn't normally happen.
Yeah,
Whereas if Miami wins game 4 and it's a split, right? Then it's anybody's series, right? Denver goes back to game 5. You would think they would win game 5, but you know, if Miami wins game 4, then game 5 is a must win for Denver. So game 4 is going to be really important. But obviously, like I said, I think it's just kind of a tale of the two stars, right? The two stars for Denver, I think in game 3 were much better than Miami's two stars,
yep.
especially offensively, and the defense as a whole for Denver was better, and that was kind of the difference there.
Sure. I agree with you 100%. I do want to drill down on a couple of things and shout out a couple of guys. Firstly, I want to shout out Jokic. He's the first player in league history. That's right, league history to put up at least 30 points, 20 rebounds, and 10 assists in a final game. And I believe the only two other players who've had that stat line in the playoffs in general, I think, were Kareem and Wilt. Correct me if I'm wrong, but
I believe so.
Jokic did make history that night, so shout out to him for sure. Um, Obviously, shout out Jamal Murray. Triple double is huge for a guard at his size, and and against a Miami team that is known for their physicality. So shout out to him for that as well, and also Christian Brown because he put up all 15 of his points in the final like what 2 quarters. I think it was the third and fourth. So and he almost shot perfect from the field. So he's 7 for 8.
The
So
only miss was the three.
exactly. So that just goes to show you that Denver they do have some pieces that I think Miami doesn't. And I think, we should probably talk about that as well, especially, considering Miami is missing Tyler Hero and his status is definitely up in the air. But I think that's a huge deal for game 4. But I do still want to talk about game 3 a little bit more.
Yeah.
Um, and what I've been seeing a lot of people say that this finals isn't exciting. And I think it is. I think it definitely is because we're watching history. This is Denver's first finals appearance that they've ever had. Um, and this is a big deal. Jokic is making history, like I said. And then also, we mentioned it multiple times. The stakes are high. And the Heat are an 8th seed, so it's a big deal. Don't write off this finals just because it doesn't have LeBron, KD, Curry, the staple names. But Jokic is he could potentially be in the discussion of one of the better big men of all time for sure. But back to game 3, I enjoyed watching this game. I thought it was a very watchable game. Towards the end, you were kind of like, okay, well, Miami's probably not going to win this, and that's mainly due to the fact that their bench is not showing up, and even their some of their starters um, that had been starting throughout the entire playoffs, they didn't show up either that night. And it's one night, it's one game, and I firmly believe that they're probably going to win on Friday as well. So I think Miami's probably going to bounce back and even the series back up because I just feel like we're watching a series where it's like a pendulum, a seesaw where the momentum is swinging. Like I'm just not confident enough in Denver that they're going to take that swing game 100% because I feel like not to say that they get complacent, but they have been complacent in this series so far. So we've seen it. And I think it's likely to happen again. I'm not saying 100% confirmed, but I think it's likely. But like you said, um, the coach Michael Malone and Jokic lit a fire under the team. But I think Spoelstra is also just as probable to do the same thing. And there's vets on both sides of these teams. We got to look at Denver, with Uncle Jeff Green, he's been around. I think what this is year is it what 16?
15, 16.
16, yeah. And I think this is what his second finals appearance. So, he's
Yeah.
been around. You'd probably like to see him be in the finals a little bit more than that, but nonetheless, he's been around. So there
ACP.
are yeah, KCP, you got what, DeAndre Jordan as well. So there are some guys that are, um vets who've been around for a while. And then if you look at the Heat, you've got Haslam, obviously. So I feel like those guys are there to, I guess, relay the message and reaffirm the coach's message as well, and also hype these guys up and let them know, don't get complacent. And if you're on the losing end, definitely don't get discouraged because it's one game. Miami's their hopes aren't done completely. So I don't know, but in this game three, you just want to see more from Miami, and that includes the stars. I'm not gonna, completely blame it on the bench and the other starters, but the stars. I want to see a better game from Jimmy for sure, definitely, because I feel like throughout the playoffs he's pretty known for exploding and going off. So this isn't the playoff Jimmy that I was expecting. I was expecting him to be a little bit better, be a little bit more efficient. Um, but nonetheless, he played okay. But you still want to see him play better, and Bam as well. I know it's such a tough task to ask Bam Adebayo to, be great and stellar on offense, and also do his best to slow down Jokic. I mean, he just looks tired, and every time I look at him, it looks like he just got out of a pool. He's just covered in sweat. But that's how hard he's working. So I don't want to, take away from what these guys are doing. But everybody on Miami needs to be better in general. Shots need to fall, and I know there is some sort of luck, but there is a lot of skill involved with that as well. And it seemed like and I know Denver's making it tough on them due to the height. It's like they're not letting them get the best and most open threes, but still. And I think that's a big thing because if you look at Denver, I feel like they have better tough shot makers, if that makes sense,
Yeah.
in Jamal Murray and Jokic, like you said. But, Miami, they do have that sometimes in Jimmy, I guess. Bam once in a while. But I feel like that missing piece is Hero, to keep their potential finals run alive. I feel like Hero needs to come back ASAP because that's something they're missing. Like, you can just see it in the offense. Like, sometimes they'll run weird pick and roll sets with, like, Bam and Strus, and it's like, I mean, that would just look so much
Yeah.
prettier and probably more likely to go in if it was, Hero and Bam. But nonetheless, I mean, you can't take away from Strus because he's a phenomenal shooter, but he has to step up. And
Yeah.
I don't know. But my concern with Hero is I don't know what kind of shape he's going to be in when he comes back. Is it going to be, a 20-point per game Hero or a 10 on bad shooting, So it's tricky. But I feel like Denver definitely has the momentum right now, but I'm not, it's not safe. It's definitely not safe, especially with this Heat team because they have potential. Um, but I don't know. With this game three, you do kind of get scared with Miami, especially with the way that they did look in that game. But Denver's
Yeah.
also liable to have a bad game because we saw it in game two.
Yeah, because again, coming off a game two, they had won, I think, 7 or 8 in a row.
Hmm.
Right. So, it felt like Denver was probably bound to lose one, and they did lose game two.
Yeah.
But again, Miami's not going to quit. They tried to make a comeback at different points in the fourth quarter, right? But Denver, I think, was just a little too much. We saw, interestingly enough, to start the fourth, I think Jokic and Jamal Murray began the fourth quarter, right? Jokic usually sits during the early
Yeah.
part of the fourth, and I think you normally just Jamal. But this time he started both guys, so clearly they were trying to, go all out to
Yeah.
win, right? Whereas Bolster, I think, had Butler on the
Yes,
bench.
he did. I was gonna
Uh,
say that.
yeah, exactly. So that's kind of something where I kind of wonder what they're gonna do there. But yeah, I think the hero thing definitely is a factor. Reportedly it sounds like he's not gonna play game four, which
Right.
again is so strange because coming into the series it was kind of suggested that he was probably gonna be a back or
Right.
available by game three. And now it's game four, right? And he's still, listed as out. Apparently Spolstra said he's not cleared yet to return.
Okay.
So that's tough, because again, you need, like you said, he's another guy that, in theory can provide you with a level of shot making, a guy that you have to respect his offense where you can't just leave him alone. Um, and he would help out there because, like you said, with Max Struess, right? Like, again, he's a good shooter, but he's better, as a catch and shoot guy when he doesn't have
Exactly.
to, create as much versus, like you said, without Hero, you're seeing a lot of pick and rolls with him where he's operating as the ball handler, and that's just not a strength of his.
Right.
Even Vincent is better at that, than
Sure.
Strus, right? So it's just like
But he had an off night too. That's what I'm saying. Because
exactly
as
get
a
off.
team, they shot 37% from the field and
Exactly.
31 from the three.
Yeah,
So clearly the
exactly.
shots weren't falling. And like I said, I feel like we do have to credit Denver with their height and the way that they're able to influence what
Yeah,
kind of threes these guys are taking. That's the
yeah,
that's the issue that Miami's having. But the
yeah.
pick and
Because
roll can free that up. But some of
right.
these guys aren't, the best shot creators.
Yeah, exactly. Because like even though Denver is not looked at as a great defensive team, they still have a lot of size
Exactly.
and athleticism, and certainly more size than Miami.
Right.
So it's like they don't because even with a guy like Jokic, I mean he's still 7 feet tall, almost 300 pounds.
Right.
So I mean like just by putting his arms up, I mean he's at times at least going to get decent contests.
Right.
Can get into the passing lanes.
Aaron Gordon.
Um, right, and again, Aaron Gordon 6'9", right, pretty much bigger than almost everyone on Miami that plays regular minutes, other than Bam, I guess.
Yeah.
Porter Jr. 6'10", even though
Right.
he doesn't necessarily play 6'10". Right, but again, even with the lack of offense, you did see him compete more on the boards and try to close out. But
Exactly.
it is interesting because again, Denver's role players were not very good either.
No.
Um, so that's the only thing. That's one thing that I am concerned about with Miami is that say next game you know, let's say next game, right, those guys bounce back and have a better performance, right? Then that probably equals a blowout. Um, but then you also have to factor in Miami's guys were so awful, right? Well, maybe they can bounce back. But that's my concern is just, it's very possible that like Denver's role players didn't show up in this game, but they'll
Yeah.
show up in the next game, right? Because they got a they got a relatively collective effort in game one. And then in game two, that wasn't the case. So they've had back to back games where a number of the supporting cast guys just didn't show up.
Right.
Right. So for Denver, I feel like they're bound to have a game where, everybody's clicking, as well. Right. And so if that happens, right, then it's more likely it may be more likely that Denver wins. But like you said, if you can get Hero back, that would help. But I just don't know if he's going to play at this point
Right.
because if he's still not even cleared to play, I
That's
mean,
rough.
he may not even be back. So that's kind of the rough part, with those reports. And that's the thing is that a lot of times it feels like whenever guys are, reportedly out with injuries, they're always out. It feels like sometimes a little bit longer than you anticipate if it's like a really serious injury, right?
Right.
Like it's one thing like if it was like a sprain, but like it's a broken hand. So you knew it wasn't going to be like a,
Yeah. It's
2 week
serious.
recovery. Exactly. So that's the tough part because Miami definitely needs him. Um, I do wonder, like I said, a part of me wonders if he were to come back, would he kind of like, not be, in terms of it being his fault, but would he maybe mess up their flow a little bit?
Right.
But at the same time, these guys are pros. He's a solid player. So, I mean, you would think he'd be able to kind of figure it out. And he does have a skill set that they do need out there. Um, but then, if you're Denver, then it's like that's another guy you can pick on defensively. Um, right? But again, if you're Miami, if Hero's out there, then that probably means fewer minutes for somebody else that maybe you don't want to play as much.
Yeah.
And I'm curious who that would be, right? That would probably, I would think, move Struess back to the bench.
I think
It
so.
become yeah, because again, you don't need to have Vincent and Hero and Struess
No.
with Butler and Bam, right? I feel like the starters would probably stay the same, but again, we don't know if he's coming back, so that's kind of the thing there right now. And again, the reason why we picked Denver, I think, is because we felt like they were the better team. Um, you mentioned that some people have said the finals, this final series is kind of boring. Um, I guess it's more so. It may I guess if you feel like that, it may just be because there may be like more thoughts about like, man, how did Miami get here? Because I don't
Right.
really look at Denver as like a boring,
Me
unexciting
neither.
team.
I
I'm
think
not
they're
even saying,
great.
and I'm not even saying Miami is either, but I'm just saying like, just, you know, in two of the three games, it just felt like Denver was, significantly better.
Sure.
And, I feel like sometimes you might have, and not that this is going to be the case because we don't know yet, right? But we have had some series in the past, right, where like a team was just clearly better, right? So like, that one team just kind of just, mopped the floor with the other
Hmm.
team, right? We had like a couple of those Cleveland Warriors finals, right, when Durant was there, right, where it was
Right.
very apparent that Cleveland was, or that Golden State was much better, right? So then you had like, a 5 game series or like a sweep, right? And
Right.
those finals, the viewership kind of responded. I think 2018 was a lower one. I
Yes.
think the bubble was the lowest one, but there were a ton of factors for that
Yeah. There's
as
a lot
well,
going
right?
on during that
So
time.
that's not necessarily, I think, fair comparison.
Right.
But regardless, again, I'm cool with it so far, right? And
Me too.
again,
I
the
love
cool
it.
thing about the playoffs in general, and even in the finals, is this is always your chance to, to kind of see, some of the top guys. Because, a lot of people don't even necessarily watch the regular season too much because there's not always a ton of marquee matchups.
Mm-hmm.
So the playoffs oftentimes may be their first, you know, taste of a lot of these stars. Right, you may have a fan that hasn't seen much of Denver and Jokic, um, you know, because they didn't watch the regular season and then they
Right.
watched the playoffs, right? Same with Jimmy Butler, right? They may not have watched the Heat a ton during the regular season, and then they see, him or Bam in the playoffs, and it's like, wow, these are some really good basketball players. So I think that's kind of how you have to look at it. But in terms of the game 4, I feel like it's gonna be either way really close. Like I
Mm-hmm.
feel like that feels like it should be a more back and forth game. It
Right.
feels like a lot of the game 4s that we've seen in these playoffs, have been closer games, right? Like we
Right.
know, like I think it was like Lakers Warriors and Lakers Grizzlies game 4, right? Both of those were like the really close, single possession victories, right?
Yeah.
I think right, like I think Phoenix, right, when they beat Denver, I think in game 4, that was a really close game.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Milwaukee, Miami game 4, right? I think that was that was the close game, right? Because that was the
That
one where
was yes.
yeah, because that was the one where Jimmy Butler had like 56.
Yeah.
So exactly. So we've seen a lot of really close, swing games like these in the playoffs. So it feels like this is how it should go. We saw a stat that is in this postseason, every team that's gone up 2-1 won the series, which makes sense. Usually, when the series is tied and you win the next game, you're more likely to win, right? Because
Yeah.
one, you're closer to the 4 wins that you need, right? And just usually, like you said, momentum tends to kind of carry teams to win. So it just kind of depends because we've seen, we mentioned this with the Lakers, and I feel like there are other teams, most teams are like that, where like you get a win, and then the next win you don't really give the same level of effort.
Sure.
So, it definitely wouldn't shock me if Miami, had a really big performance in game 4, and won like a really close game. Because we've seen when it's a close game, they're better than a lot of other teams have been in the playoffs. I think, even when they're down, right? Because I think, we mentioned on the live stream the stat where going into the fourth quarter, if they're down by, I think at least what, 8 points or so, right? 8 or more points, they're 4-5, and every other team in the playoffs is like 1-41. So, in order to beat this Miami team, you got to put them away pretty much before the fourth quarter. You got to be up
Yeah.
basically, by probably like, 15 or so. And even then, right, they have, they've been able to execute relatively well. So, we'll see what happens. But I think either way, it's going to be a close game.
Yes.
Um, right. Because it just feels like it's headed that way,
Yeah.
unless Denver has like just a crazy out of body offensive. Well, I can't even say out of body because they've had so many of them. But, unless they have like, just a really high level game on the road,
Where
right?
everyone
It
plays
feels
well.
yeah, where everyone plays well. Miami should win game 4, but
Mm-hmm.
it wouldn't shock me, because we've seen Denver, pull out these, big road wins. Like we saw, right? They got 2 against LA, right? They got that, crazy one in Denver against the Suns, right, where they were up by 30 at halftime.
Yeah.
So you just never know with this team, and kind of like you said, right? That's kind of why going into the playoffs, it was kind of interesting, in terms of, where where to put them. Because I feel like most people had them in the contender status, but some people had them, you know,
Lower.
in like that, yeah, in like that second tier, right? Because I feel like a lot of people tended to have Phoenix and Golden State,
Us
right? And you
included.
look at the odds, right? Yeah, exactly, us included, right? Those two teams tended to be in the highest tier, right? And then Denver was in that next tier, even though they were the number 1 seed. But again, now they're 2 games away from pretty much answering all the questions that
Yep.
people have had over the years about can you win a core, right, when your best player is a center, right, particularly when he's not a great defender, right, Jamal Murray, right, how does he look as a co-star, right? The answer so far these playoffs have been very good. He's averaging almost 30 a game next to Jokic, right? And then again, the other Denver role players, right, they've had games where they've been kind of spotty, right, which that was the concern going into the playoffs, right? But again, we've had games where Jokic and Murray did just enough on their own to carry them to a win. So, it's been a really interesting matchup just because again, it feels like Denver is the better and more talented team, but we know Miami's a tough, resilient team and very well coached. So they have the ability to, to kind of pull out these big wins where you're like, how did they do that, right? Because they've been doing it all postseason.
Right.
And it feels like Denver is kind of like the ultimate test for them. The sort of like a final boss of sorts, just because they're the best team that Miami's faced so far, right? They're
Pretty much, yeah.
again Milwaukee, right? Obviously, you had the factor in the Giannis and Middleton injuries, um, right? And then you go to the Knicks, right? Obviously, they weren't the same in terms of the matchup, and then Boston, right? Again, different from Denver, right? Like you've said, not as well coached, right? In terms of execution, they don't execute as consistently,
Right.
right? They're a lot easier to read, I think, than Denver. So
Yes, for
this is
sure. I
definitely
agree.
a tough matchup for Miami. So, again, they have the chance if they win Game 4. Obviously, their chances of winning the series go up much higher. Um, but again, it's tough because you lost in Miami. So now, if you're going to win the series, you're still going to have to make up for it, by getting another one in Denver,
Yeah.
right? I think, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
I agree
yeah,
100%.
because they have to win 3 more games.
Yeah.
Um, and I guess there's only, if you count next game, right, there'd be 2 more Miami games.
Yeah.
So
So yeah, I agree 100% with that. And I guess kind of looking into game four just a little bit before we move on, something kind of popped into my mind because this guy, I feel like he could be one of their X factors if he actually plays well. And I'm speaking from Miami, by the way. Um, do you think we could be seeing potentially them start Kyle Lowry?
mm, I don't know. My guess is probably not.
Okay.
It seems like he's kind of been, the go-to backup guard off the bench since, like, I think the middle part of the season when he was
Right.
nursing his injuries. So he's obviously been playing a lot of minutes. Some of that was due to Vincent getting into foul trouble.
Yeah.
Um, so I think that they do trust their starting five as long as Hero is out. But I do think Lowry could probably just play a lot of minutes because he played 30 minutes last game.
Yes.
So I mean, because again, you don't have to start to play a ton of minutes.
Right.
Because Max Strus, because he wasn't that good, he didn't play as much, and Love didn't play as much because he wasn't that great either. So I just kind of wonder, like, maybe like a Haywood Highsmith appearance, right? Because that was kind of
Right.
interesting. We saw him in Game 1, and he played relatively well and kind of sparked a Miami sort of comeback, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then we haven't seen him at all really since then. Um, but again, I just think, at home, you got to have, a collective effort, right? The stars have to be better and the role players have to be better. And
Yeah.
that's how they're going to win, against Denver if they're going to win, right? Because again, you know, just you had a lot of really poor performances across the board, and your stars didn't play that great individually themselves either, right?
Right.
So, again, you look at the shooting splits: 37 from the field, 31 from three. That's not going to be good enough to beat most teams,
For sure.
especially by the time you get into the NBA Finals, right? Especially if the other team shot over 50% from the field. So,
And I guess Gabe Vincent is, more liable to have a better game than Kyle Lowry. Like, I guess, due to the foul trouble, that wasn't the case in the last one, I guess. But,
and he can attack the basket a little bit
yeah,
better,
faster,
than
younger.
Lowry, right? So I don't think they're going to change the starting five.
Right.
Um, again, if Hero was playing, maybe they would, but it sounds like he's out. So I'm assuming the starting five is probably going to stay the same. We
Right.
might see like a little bit different minutes distribution, right? Maybe we might see some guys that didn't play as much last game maybe play more.
Hmm.
But it also depends, right? Because again, if Miami's rolling early on, right, then they're probably not going to make drastic changes anyways, right? So we'll just kind of have to see. But I think for Miami, um, just got to keep it close, right? Like you can't, like they were down by 19 towards the end of the third and then cut it to 14, but I just didn't feel like they were coming back.
Sure.
Um, I feel like if they're relatively close, they got a pretty good chance. It's because again, that's how they've won a lot of these games is they've kind of hung around and they've been able to kind of, be down by maybe like somewhere between like 7 to 10 points going into the fourth, and that's
Hmm.
how they've been able to steal these games, right? But if they're down by like 15, 12, 15 or more going into the fourth, they're probably not going to win. So I think they're going to have to start well,
Hmm.
and I think they're definitely going to have to close quarters really well because
Yes.
that's also the key too. Because if they don't close the quarters well, right, then
It's
again that
so
makes it
hard
even
against
worse.
Jokic, dude. It's such a hard task.
So that's the key. And then they definitely can't lose the non-Jokic minutes, as we've seen all playoffs, right? Because Denver has done a better job in the playoffs of sustaining non-Jokic minutes, and that's kind of one of the reasons why they've been, better, so far in the playoffs, than I think some people might have expected. Obviously,
Hmm.
he's when he's on the floor, it's great. right? But you can't necessarily completely fall off a cliff when he's off the floor. And
Right.
they've been getting, contributions from guys, mainly defensively. Because again, you're probably not going to score a ton when he's off the floor, unless you're getting a lot of stops, right? Because I think in game two, even though they lost that game, they built up that big lead when he was off the floor because they were getting stops and getting out in
Yes, they were.
transition. And that's probably what you're going to have to do if he's not out there.
Yep.
So that's the other key is that what defensive effort do we see from Denver? Because if it's closer to what we saw in game three, then they're probably going to win anyways. Because again, Miami, a lot of the shots that they missed, again, were well contested. I think it was 62% of their 3-point attempts were contested.
Yeah.
I think it was about 30 through the first couple of
Denver
games.
made it tough for them, man.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the other key as well. Because if Denver's defense is fine, like if it's solid, then they're probably going to win most nights anyways. Because
Sure.
offensively they're normally going to be really good. So the key for Miami is can you be precise and uh really effective on offense. I mean,
Right.
because again, like defensively, it's going to be tough against Denver anyways. We've seen them at times defend them well with the zone. It didn't work as well this game. But you got to be able to score with them because again, if you miss a lot of shots, they're going to get out and run, and then that fuels their offense, right? And again, if they keep getting easy buckets, you're not going to win anyways.
Yeah.
So and again, it's tough because again, going in, they're not as talented as Denver, so they have to be the smarter, the more precise, the more calculated team. And
There's
again,
not a
that's
lot of
tough.
room for
They're
error.
a really smart team as well. So it's definitely a tough matchup, which is why we both picked Denver to go into the series. We both thought that it would be a competitive series, right? Like I didn't expect it to be like a sweep or a 5-game
Right.
series.
Right.
And I
Right.
think in current playoff era, anyways, it's really difficult to sweep a team unless like that team is just, you know, not good at all,
Sure.
right? Like we saw like the Brooklyn team against Philly, and that Brooklyn team, even though they were, I think, what the 6th seed, they were
Yeah.
a below 500 team with that trade deadline squad. So their playoff record, their playoff standing was really better than what they actually were as a team, right? Because we know with the previous iteration when they had Durant and Kyrie, that was where they got most of their wins.
Yes, it
Um,
was.
but just in general, right? It's hard to sweep a team, right? We saw Denver sweep LA, right? And again, that was closer than the Brooklyn series, but Denver on the margins, right? In terms of the shot making, right, and just late game execution, they were better, and that's the tough part about beating them is that they're a really smart team and a really efficient team, um, and you have to find a way to be better than them. And again, when you have the talent, you have a chance, right? But you got to work double overtime in order to beat them when you don't have the talent necessarily to match up. Because you
Right.
would think Miami technically has more quote unquote guys, right? Because Denver is playing like what 8 guys, and even though and not all of those 8 guys, are consistent, you know, players, right?
Hmm.
Right, Jeff Green, is kind of up and down. Right, Brown was up and down up until this series. Um, right? But just in general, um, you know, the Denver guys at the top, right? That's the tough part is that they're ultimately the better two-man combo, right? And they have a lot of different things that they can do because, like I said, they did the two-man game with the dribble handoff, which they didn't do as much of through the first 2 games, and again, Miami hasn't been able to figure that out. So again, each game is a series of adjustments. It's like a chess match. So that's what Spoelstra is going to have to figure out. Spoelstra and the rest of the guys in Miami, they're going to have to figure out, hey, what can we do that didn't work in the previous game? Because again, we saw them take away the two-man game through the first couple of games. They took it away in the fourth of game one, and they took it away through most of game two, right? But it just, again, that's the problem. Denver, it seems like they've been able to find ways to, if you take one thing away, they can do something else, right? Aaron
Crazy.
Gordon attacked a lot to start in game one, right? Miami adjusted, right? And then, what do you see all of a sudden, right? Then you see Jamal Murray attacking more. You see Jokic attacking more, right? Even with Aaron Gordon, right? He's not going off as consistently, but they're still attacking his mismatches really quickly and really effectively. So it's good process from Denver pretty much on offense. They had some bad shots in game two, but overall they've been the better team through the first 3 games. We'll just have to see what Miami's made of in game four because we know they're a tough, resilient team. They have a chance to win game four. They're at home. But they've lost 3 in a row, I think, at home. So that's the tough part where it feels like the home court advantage for them is starting to run thin. And again, that can sometimes happen when you're playing better teams at this point in the
Yeah.
playoffs. But, again, it feels like they're due for a big time home performance.
Yeah. The Cinderella mojo could be over, but at the same time, I definitely think they're going to take game 4.
So I guess going into the next topic, this was, it was a long discussion, right? But again, we have to talk about it because
Yeah,
it's, of course, the NBA Finals,
of
and this is
course.
going to be our, first and most important topic. The next one, because you had a lot of stuff, leading up to that game. One of which was the Chris Paul CP3 wave wire, basically news. So Chris Haynes reporting that Phoenix has told or notified Chris Paul and his camp that they're gonna waive him. It hasn't officially happened yet, obviously. Um, I think they have until June. I think it's either the 28th or the 30th,
Okay.
um, something like that. So not too long, right? Basically 3 weeks or so.
Yeah.
But this one definitely caught me by surprise. We had talked about that Phoenix probably to improve would need to move on from at least one of Paul or Aiton. Um, we talked about maybe potential trades, but again, the problem with the trade for Phoenix is, what team is interested in trading for Paul? Because again, you think given his age and his contract, you would think Phoenix would have to be the team that would have to probably give up something,
Hmm.
in order to get back stuff, right? Because we saw with the Lakers, right, in order to get off of Westbrook, they had to move a pick. Um, you know, so just it's gonna be tough for them. But I do kind of wonder what's going on with it because then you had the reports from Shams and Woj where they were almost kind of like walking things back, where they were like, "Well, nothing has been set in stone yet, right? Phoenix is trying to figure out, maybe we trade him, also potentially maybe waive him and then re-sign him, which is
I
kind of
don't get
weird."
that.
Um, yeah, I think part of that is to get them under the tax line, like, or
Okay,
under the
got you.
lower apron.
Right.
But it depends on what they do because I think if they stretch out his contract, they can't re-sign him. But if they just waive him outright,
So that
right,
has
and
something to
have
do with
money
like
on
the
the books,
CBA, right?
yeah,
Okay, got you.
exactly. So that's kind of weird. But then they also mentioned teams of interest, right? Woj mentioned the two LA teams, right? Lakers, Clippers, right? And obviously we know, what's up there, right? We know with the Lakers, right? He's got a great relationship with LeBron.
Mm-hmm.
Right, in terms of the fit, I've always felt like those two guys may not necessarily be like the most ideal fits, but in this latter part of LeBron's career where he's not necessarily playing as much with the ball in his hands,
Mm-hmm.
I think the fit would be a lot easier
Right.
to work with, right? Because clearly he doesn't want to, tax himself over the course of the season, right? Where he's, operating in really high usage and controlling most of the offense. Because we've seen, right, the last couple of years, he's kind of transitioned to being more of a big, where he's playing off the ball more, posting up, screening. So that type of LeBron playing like that, I think, is a better fit than it would have been, right?
Right.
My thing is, if he goes to LA with the Lakers, me personally, as a Laker fan, I prefer him sort of as a backup,
Okay.
not necessarily as a starter. Obviously, I know because of his reputation and because of he's still a good player. Maybe that's not likely,
Mm-hmm.
but I just feel like again, if you're playing him big minutes in a big role, he's probably just going to get hurt again. Uh,
So I have a question to pose then. What it say, D'Lo doesn't come back, right? Um, what are you thinking
mhm.
about that? If D'Lo doesn't come back and then Chris Paul is there, would you be comfortable with Chris Paul as your starting point guard or D'Lo? I'm just curious because I know a lot of Laker fans who've desired Chris Paul to be on their team. For ages. When the trade was first vetoed back in the day. So I feel like this is something that is most likely going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I would be kind of surprised if they let go of D'Lo to get Chris Paul because again, if he gets waived, you wouldn't have to sign him to a big contract. It would
Right.
be presumably to a small one. So I think you could have both.
But I'm
It
just
was
saying,
just
like, what if like D'Lo like gets
if he
offered
was
something?
gone.
Yeah, like say D'Lo is gone 100%. Then what? Do we look at Chris Paul or what?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it kind of depends on how he goes because
Sure.
let's say if it's like a sign and trade, right, then
Mm-hmm.
you're presumably getting something back. But
Right.
then the issue is if you do a sign and trade, which we hadn't even discussed when we previously talked about this topic,
Mm-hmm.
a sign and trade would hard cap the other team.
Right.
So they would also have to kind of factor in what team would really want to hard cap themselves to get
Right.
D'Angelo Russell. If it's a team that's like nowhere near that level, then they don't care, right? But if they're relatively close because they have other big salaries, maybe they do care.
Right.
Um, but I think if you're LA, I think the one thing you can't do with D'Angelo Russell is just let him walk. Unless he asks
Sure.
for like some ridiculous number where he's asking for like 30 plus million a
Which
year.
is I think that's probable, but
Yeah, which is
not
possible.
not not it's not set
Right.
in stone, but it
'Cause
is it is a possibility.
He's making, I think, 30 right now.
Hmm.
I think he was probably looking for somewhere around that when they first traded for him.
Yeah,
I think after the postseason, it would probably be closer to like 25. I think he would be looking for 25,
I
at
agree.
least. I just don't know, what's LA's number, right? Because obviously LA has a number, he has a number. So that's kind of how I look at it. If he walks, then I guess you wouldn't really have much of a choice, but to kind of like, get Chris Paul because
Hmm.
again, you can't really get a player of D'Lo's caliber, for the minimum contract or for an exception, right? You'd be kind of in a really rough spot. Um, but like I said, ideally, I'd prefer to just keep D'Lo and then have Chris Paul as a backup. But I don't know, the ramifications of all that because I don't know if Chris Paul, sees himself, as being okay with coming off the bench. I don't
Right.
know at this point. But that's just how I look at it because I would just worry if D'Lo is gone, right, and then it's Chris Paul, right. Then you got Chris Paul, AD, LeBron, and all three of those guys are probably going to miss a decent amount of time.
Sure.
And you need those guys to play during the regular season. And again, I just feel like if you're asking Chris Paul to play big minutes over the course of the regular season and the playoffs, he's going to get hurt.
It's probably a
Um,
recipe for a lower seeding again, kind of like
yeah,
this season. You're probably not going to
exactly.
get a top seed.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's the difficulty there. They also mentioned the Clippers.
Hmm.
I'm assuming he's got a relationship. I'm guessing with one of Paul George or
It's
Kawhi.
got to be PG.
Yeah, and then maybe he has a relationship with Ty Lue. And
Probably.
obviously he also played for the Clippers, in the past.
Sure.
Um, that one I think is an interesting situation, depending on what they do with Russ, because
Hmm.
again, does he come back to the Clippers? Maybe he does. Because obviously I think he's played himself into, a sphere where he's gonna get more than a minimum contract.
Oh yeah, easily.
Exactly. And I guess the Clippers could probably give him the exception, right? But again, that's not that's probably closer to what? I think it depends on what part of the cap you're in. I guess somewhere around like 6 to 8,
Yeah,
something like that.
something around
So
there.
maybe a team maybe gives them a little more than that, but we'll just have to see. Like if Russ is gone and you're the Clippers, you'd probably take Chris Paul. Um, because again, right, they're a team where like they probably would like to have somebody who can, kind of set the table, so that way Kawhi and Paul George don't always have to go one on one.
Sure.
And again, like obviously those are your two best players, so you kind of want them with the ball down the stretch of
It's to
games. But
relieve pressure, though. We get
exactly,
it.
but
We all
yeah,
know.
you still need guys to relieve pressure, especially again during other parts of the game. Especially if one of them is off the floor, you'd like to have somebody who can do that. So I think that's a decent fit. Um, but those are the two ones that Woj mentioned. In
Right.
terms of what teams you're thinking, can you think of teams outside of
Sure.
LA? I think when we did the live stream, I know one of our viewers, Moverse, he mentioned Boston,
Yeah,
right?
I like
Which
that
I can
one.
see. Yeah, I like that one, as a fit because again, similar to the Clippers, right? They need a guy that can kind of set the table. We know Marcus Smart is fine, right? But
Hmm.
there's gonna be moments, right, where you probably don't want the ball in his hands late in
Sure.
games. So I do like that one, but are there other teams you think
Well,
of?
outside of Boston, I actually slept on this one, which is kind of interesting. But um, I could see the Spurs. I don't know, if that's a possibility money wise or whatever. But I'd be curious to see, Popovich have, a traditional point guard again, and then also with, Wemby, he should be going to San Antonio, being there as well. I feel like that would be a cool fit. Um, Let me think of who else. Um, I know one of our viewers also said the 76ers. I didn't really like that one. I wasn't too high on that one because, we
Only
talked
I think
about that.
that's yeah, I think that's only a possibility. Maybe I think he mentioned if Harden were to leave.
Yeah,
But at the same time, like I don't know. I feel like that would be a downgrade.
diminishing returns. We
Yeah,
even said that in the live stream. But,
yeah. I think
probably Boston and the Spurs. I
yeah.
think those are my two.
Yeah, it was kind of interesting because on some of the other national shows that I had looked at a couple of times, there were a few shows that had mentioned one of them I think mentioned the Spurs and another one mentioned the Grizzlies. I
I don't
think
understand the Grizzlies one.
yeah, I think it
Unless
was
Jaws features up in
yeah,
the
I think it
air.
was first things first. They mentioned the Grizzlies, and I think the rationale was like if like you said if Ja's out for an extended
Okay.
period of time,
I could see
you
that then.
you could have Chris Paul, you could have Tyus Jones,
Ooh, I like
take
that.
turns.
I like
Yeah,
that.
exactly. So that's an interesting fit. I mean, you wouldn't need all three of them come playoff time,
Right.
but again, the rationale from what Chris Haynes mentioned was that Paul wants to continue to play for quote unquote several more years,
Yeah, yeah,
but
yeah.
he also wants to win.
Right.
So the Spurs one would be interesting, but obviously you're not winning
No,
with the Spurs,
obviously
right?
not.
So It would be interesting because you would think it would probably drive up some of the value for some of the young players on the Spurs, right? Because we saw when he was in Oklahoma City that one year, right, where some of their young guys looked pretty good
Yes, sir.
alongside him. But like I said, I think at this point at 38, he probably wants to go, he probably wants to go to a winning team.
Right.
So it feels like one of the LA ones may be inevitable, but we also have to wait and see, when he actually does get, waived, right?
I'm
Because this was
sure his
reported.
mindset is contention or
Yeah.
nothing, you know.
Exactly, yeah. Because what else are you playing for at this point, right? Because
Exactly.
again, like, he's already got, a lot of the individual awards, his teams have had, varying levels of success, but the one thing he's missing is pretty much a
That ring.
title.
Yep.
So, I mean, at that point, there's not really much else that he would probably need to play for.
Right.
So that's what I'm thinking, but, again, it hasn't been official yet, right? Because like we said, we saw the other reports kind of walk some things back, but it does feel kind of inevitable that
It's on
he
its way.
probably. Yeah, because I just feel like I don't see a team realistically trading stuff to get him. I would just be really shocked to see that. Just because I just don't think he would be worth that. And I just feel like at 38, the other team should be getting stuff back for him versus the other way around.
I agree.
Um, because we saw a weird report, from an insider, right? On Tim McMahon, the ESPN podcast or radio show, he mentioned that an insider said that they were looking to keep CP3 as opposed to Aiton. I'm like, I don't believe that.
Yeah, I
So
think we kind of shot that one down pretty
yeah,
quickly.
exactly. So yeah, so again, we'll see. And there were rumors, other rumors that Woj put out about them still looking to move Aiton, so they could potentially, quote unquote, clean house
What are you getting
this
back though?
offseason, make some major moves because again, they're gonna have to because now that you have Durant, right, you're a team that needs to be in win now mode and contend every year. So you got to figure out a way to put a winning team alongside him
Right.
and Booker. And it starts probably with getting some more depth to round out, the rest of your roster because they
Right.
just didn't have enough guys to get them through, the rest of the playoffs. So
Right.
that's kind of the goal there. And it's going to be tough because, again, they're in a situation similar to Golden State where they're way over the cap with a lot of big salaries. So they're going to have to figure out, how to navigate that. And that's probably what part of the Chris Paul move is to free up, some money, not necessarily for salary, but just to get them in the lower part of the cap so they're not getting quite as penalized. Because there's some, really heavy punitive measures coming in the new CBA. I think I saw from a guy, Eric Pincus, where he mentioned that if you perform a trade, I think that's, maybe 110% of, the contracts, right? Which we've seen a lot, right? Where we see like the salaries aren't exact, right? Where one team trades back for a little bit more.
Hmm.
Um, that could put you right in that super tax bracket, right? Just depending on, I guess, where you are currently and then what you trade for.
Right.
So, it's going to be tough for a lot of these teams to navigate that. And Phoenix is definitely has one of the harder jobs because, again, you have a really good starting point with Durant and Booker, but you need more,
Yep.
right? 'Cause, I don't feel like they're going to probably be good enough as currently constructed next year. So they're going to, I think, have to probably make some real moves. And it feels like it starts with Chris Paul and 8.
I agree.
And then I guess, to round out, our final topic before we get into some, more newsy stuff. Another Chris Haynes thing. This one was really strange
Hmm.
where Chris Haynes put out that Kyrie Irving has been recruiting LeBron to come to Dallas. That one was just really strange. He even had a tweet where I think he mentioned that Dallas was looking to trade for LeBron during the regular season when they were struggling, and then when they made the moves and started winning more, then they relented. But that didn't make any sense to me because from what I remembered, when he signed that extension in the offseason, he wasn't even trade eligible.
Right.
um so that didn't make any sense, and then the tweet was taken down afterwards, so
As it should
that.
have been.
Yeah, so I don't know what was going on there. um so I guess we'll have to start there, I guess, with that. So that was definitely strange. I guess the way that I look at it is, again, like, Kyrie's in Dallas.
Right.
He's a free agent.
Right.
Obviously, he wants his money.
Sure.
He's gonna get the most money from Dallas,
Right.
right? So I feel like that alone is probably the reason why Dallas is the most likely destination for Kyrie next season. And again, Dallas is kind of in a position where they can't really afford to let him walk because they have no means to replace him. Um, I guess when I look at it, I buy the idea that LeBron would like to play with Luca and Kyrie. I do buy
Sure.
that. I know he's
Who
talked
wouldn't?
very glowing. Yeah, and I know he's talked very, glowingly about Luca in the past. Obviously, we know he likes Kyrie a lot. But I don't buy the idea that he would leave LA to go to Dallas. Um,
Right.
and like, one, I feel like he really likes being in LA.
Right.
I know they had, like, weird situations earlier in the season, right, where it felt like there was a little bit of butting heads because of LA not making moves initially to put together a good roster. But I feel like it seems like he really likes it there. We know his son is going to USC,
Right.
in the fall. And then I guess at the same time, we also have to look at it from the perspective of like, how does Dallas get LeBron? I mean, they'd have to trade for him, but I don't feel like they have enough, to really realistically trade.
The only deal I could think of, which would never, ever, ever happen, and especially not this season or in the off season, would be LeBron for freaking Luca, and that's
Yeah,
not happening. It's the
exactly.
only one
So
that even remotely, quote unquote, makes sense.
yeah, there's technically a financial pathway,
Right.
where
It's
Dallas
not
would have to,
logical.
yeah, exactly, where Dallas would have to throw in like a number of their contracts, right? Like a Dinwiddie, Dwight Powell, but again, like LA's not doing that. They're,
And
you know,
I have a question because I'm
Mhm.
not too well versed in the CBA and stuff like that, but I'm
Right,
pretty
right.
sure with this new
Yeah.
CBA, looking
Mhm.
from the Lakers' perspective, I'm pretty sure they can't have, you know, LeBron, Kyrie, and AD on max salary levels, without like huge penalties, right? Because then
The way
they would have to get Kyrie on a discount, and I'm pretty sure he
Yeah.
knows his worth, and he's not gonna cut his money.
Yeah, it would be have
It's
to be
dumb,
it would have to be a significantly unrealistic discount.
right?
And if it was, and we talked about it in a sign and trade, the problem with that, if you're LA, is you have to say goodbye to a number of guys that are on
Right.
your right. You would not be able to bring back both Rui and Reeves, right? One or maybe both of them would have to go, which I wouldn't do that if you're LA. And again, if it was a double sign and trade between D'Lo and Kyrie, right? Well, then Dallas is hard capped, and why would
No,
Dallas,
no,
put themselves in a rough situation for D'Angelo Russell when that's a downgrade from Kyrie? So, like I said,
exactly.
I buy the idea of LeBron wanting to play with those guys. I don't buy the idea that he would leave LA to go to Dallas.
Sure.
Because again, until his contract is up, the only way he can get there is he would either have to be traded there or he would have to ask for a buyout. And I think,
Right.
he's got 2 years left, and I don't see that happening. The funny thing was, I think it was Bill Simmons on his podcast a while back. He mentioned like there could be a potential situation where it was like Kyrie in Dallas. And I think he might have said this before Kyrie was traded to Dallas or
Okay.
something. No, Draymond going to Dallas. It
What?
was Draymond leaving Golden State going to Dallas with LeBron joining them. And like, yeah, technically there's a financial pathway for all of
Yeah.
that to happen because Dallas would have to trade pieces like, the 10th pick and a couple
Right.
salaries to get LeBron, and then they'd have to do a sign and trade, for Draymond and then just re-sign Kyrie. But no, that's not happening.
Nope. No shot.
Yeah, I just
And
don't. I just don't see. Like I said, I know LeBron wants to play with Kyrie, and I'm sure he would like to play with LeBron. I just financially, I just don't really see it happening without LA making some big sacrifices, and maybe they would do that, you know, you know, in order to make it happen. But I just feel like that'd be a big mistake because I
sure.
just don't think you can let go of those other guys just to get Kyrie, because then you're in a similar situation before where you have 3 stars that are probably going to miss time and not much else. And again, that's a really talented big three, obviously, but you still need other role players to help you out. And I just don't think you're going to find those type of guys on minimum contracts. So that's the tough part there, right? Obviously, the way that I look at their offseason is if you can find a way to upgrade from D'Angelo Russell without having to hamstring yourself, yeah, go for it.
Right.
But if not, right, then I would not put myself in a bad situation, just to get out of that, right? So, we'll just have to see. But again, they, did a decent job at the deadline. So it's possible that they can, work some magic in the offseason and get somebody else. But I just think the Kyrie one, it just feels like that one's just a little bit too difficult. The reporting was just so strange because, like I said, just when all that came out at the same time, just felt so bizarre.
Right.
Um, because again, you don't usually see stuff like this, during the finals, right? Like,
No, it's
I know
corny.
a couple of times we've had like, little mini transactions. Like I think the Christian Wood trade happened during the finals last
Hmm.
year, right? But he's not, going to be discussed in the same tier as these guys, right?
No.
We don't hear stuff like, Kyrie's recruiting LeBron or what was the other thing? Chris Paul might be getting waived, right? We don't usually hear stuff like that during the finals, but
Right.
just for whatever reason, we've heard a lot of stuff outside of the finals for whatever reason during the finals, which is so strange, right? Because, usually most of the discussion is on the finals during the finals, right? But we've had just as many discussions on other things beyond the finals, and again, maybe that speaks to, how people feel about the matchup. I don't know, but it's just been kind of interesting because I feel like these discussions, like people will talk about, but like not to this degree, right? And not to the degree where reporters are, reporting this kind of stuff.
Right. I agree. And, for me, I think Irving's going to be in Dallas and LeBron's going to be in LA this offseason. Simple as that. This is just hullabaloo.
Yeah, I think so. So I guess now to wrap it up with some news. So we'll start with your Wizards.
Oh, yay.
A lot of rivals, rival executives. That sounds kind of funny, but a lot of rival executives believe that the Wizards are gonna engage relatively soon in a full rebuild. So that's definitely kind of an interesting scenario, right? Obviously, they got that new guy Michael Winger to run the Wizards, right? I guess it's the Wizards, the Go Go, and the Mystics. So
Yes.
obviously, you know, in charge. It seems like he's making some really good hires and bringing new people in.
Yep.
Um, yeah, but according to the Athletic, Josh Robbins, yeah, it says expect him to undertake a full rebuild, if not this offseason, then within the next year. Now, what does that necessarily mean? I
Hmm.
mean, does that mean that we're gonna see like Bradley Beal get moved, or or other random guys on the team get moved? I don't know. But they do have a lot of questions, and again, it's a tough job to take over because again, you have a number of guys who are solid players, right? But they're also either making a ton of money or gonna be making a ton of money, right? Like Kuzma's a good player, right? But he might be getting like close to a max contract this offseason, assuming the Wizards bring him back, right?
Right.
Kristaps Porzingis, I don't know what his value is, but I mean, like, I feel like he's
I
probably
think it's
decent
high.
enough. He could probably,
I think it's
yeah,
around the
I feel like
same as
he's gonna
Kuz, if you want me to be honest,
yeah,
because there
he
were
had a really
times where Porzingis was our best player.
yeah, because he had a really good season, so I could see him, getting a big contract. And I just feel like him, Beal, and Kuzma, right? Is that a good enough big three to warrant paying all that money? To those three guys, I just don't know. So I could. It makes sense, right? And it sounded like the owner, has kind of been more not necessarily hands off, right? But more like, I'm gonna let you do whatever you need to do. Um, you know, in terms of do what you see fit to run this team.
Hmm.
So we could see a lot of movement from them. I'm just curious, right? Like let's say they actually do, pull the plug on the Beal thing.
Sure.
I mean, he has a no trade clause, so
Right.
obviously you have to start there. It would have to be I mean, and even if he didn't have a no trade clause, I feel like they wouldn't just randomly move him
No,
to a
he's done
team.
a lot, and
Um,
there's a good relationship there, I think.
yeah, but and then you have to factor in he's making a lot of money, right? He's going to be making what 50 plus million a year, something like that. So
Yep.
you have to factor that in as well. So I just feel like again, it's good that they got somebody in there, before they have to make all these decisions. Obviously, because they have a decent amount of time, until the draft, until free agency. But it's definitely a tough job, to pull off because there's a lot of questions about the roster in terms of what are they going to do, who are they going to pay, and do they even bother continuing to go with the roster? Because again, it feels like the ceiling is probably set, as like a play-in team, maybe like a potentially like a low we're playoff seeding team if
Hmm.
if things roll their way. But again, like we've seen teams in the past, right? Commit a lot of money, right, to guys that you probably don't necessarily want to pay a ton of money to
Right.
if you're trying to compete. But either way, right? Again, as the Wizards, it's also a team that in general has a tough time recruiting guys to come to the team. So, that makes it tougher as well because that means you either have to really draft well or you have to pull off some really good trades. So it again, as I mentioned, it's a tough position to be in. If you ranked like, the toughest GM jobs, it's probably somewhere towards the top.
Yep.
I don't think it's the worst. Yeah, I don't think it's the toughest one, the
No,
worst
no,
one necessarily, but it's definitely up there just because you have a lot to figure out in terms of your paying, a star a lot of money, right? Who probably isn't in necessarily the same tier as some of the other guys that
no.
are on
Hmm.
that type of contract, and the same with the other guys. So that's kind of a tough position to be in. But again, um, it seems like he's got a pretty solid resume, and he's hired some other good guys as well. So, I guess this is the guy you're gonna have to put your trust in, and I guess it seems like so far, I guess good job, I suppose.
Yeah. For me, I think this is a step in the right direction. And the one word that I do want to say is finally. It's about time that we did look at our options and weigh them significantly and heavily. The Beal era hasn't necessarily been all flowers, sunshine, and rainbows. It's been pretty dark over here, I think. But in terms of looking at this squad, you have to break it down and look at this team and look at the guys that we have right now. And I think that's what they're doing. And they're saying, I don't think a championship is within reach of these guys. They don't. I don't think they gel and mesh together well enough to consider them a top contender. Like you said, I feel like the baseline for them is probably playing 8 seed. I think that's the highest they can probably go, just due to the fact that the guys that they have on the roster, the production levels. You have to weigh how how healthy are they going to be as well. There's a lot of factors that go into looking at this squad, but I think a rebuild is the right decision. I think the time is now for this. Like I said, I feel like or like you said, I feel like the hardest part is definitely going to be, how do you move Beal? I think the other guys, it's not too much of a decision to make, but you do have to weigh in the fact that these guys their contracts are expiring, so you got to figure out, are you going to pay them or are you going to let them go? It's tough, but it's just interesting that they want to do a rebuild right when these guys are on their expiration date in terms of their contracts. And you also have Beal as well, who's going to be one of the highest paid players in the NBA coming into the season. So it's a tough, like you said, it's a tough job, but I feel like, PR wise and the reports that we're getting, I can't be mad at it at all. And it's about time because we need some love in Washington. So I'm here for it.
Yeah, exactly. Again, the direction is kind of the first thing you have to set
Yeah,
is what is the goal for this team? Where do we want to go? Where are we going and where do we want to go?
right,
So that's kind of, I think, the first step that you have to take in terms of, if you're going, into that direction to rebuild or not.
right.
Um, Next up, right, Damian Lillard. So, we kind of talked about it, on, our live stream,
Hmm.
right, where I think, on his, or I guess The Last Stand, right, is what it was called. Yeah,
Yeah.
Showtime Sports The Last Stand. He did say he believes that he will begin the season in Portland next year, but he also mentioned, um, that if he were to be traded, the teams he wouldn't mind at all, playing for. I think it was Heat, Nets, and New York Knicks.
Yes.
Um,
All three of those are correct.
exactly. Chris Haynes said that Boston is unlikely, which again makes sense because again, like
Wouldn't work.
it's kind of like what we talked about with Beal, where he's kind of at a point now, Lillard, where what are teams going to be giving up to get him? Because like he's still in a tier where you're probably going to have to give up a lot.
You're right.
But if you're, X team, do you want to give up that much?
Right.
Because I think I said on the live stream, the best thing that could happen for Portland is that a team overpays to trade for Lillard,
Sure.
and they get a lot back for him, more than they probably should be getting, so they can kind of jumpstart and accelerate that rebuild. Because again, I don't know. Because like I said, I think that they should keep the pick because I just don't feel like they're going anywhere. So I would
Right.
rather keep that pick.
Keep it.
But I do understand if you're going to keep Lillard, and keep playing this game, right? Then yeah, I could see them potentially trading it. I just, it's just going to be fascinating because I guess to kind of kind of couple these two topics together, right? There was
Hmm.
also a suggestion from Kevin O'Connor of The Ringer where he mentioned that a lot of the things that he had heard was that it's very possible that Charlotte doesn't pick Scoot, that they pick Brandon Miller, and then that potentially leaves Scoot,
Yeah.
for Portland, which I think that would be a really interesting scenario if you're Portland, because again,
You got to
you're
take the
not a
best
team that's good.
available if you're
Yeah,
Portland.
exactly. You're not a team that's good enough to go for fit. You take the best available. So if that were to happen, right? Yeah, you definitely take Scoot, right, and you don't ask any questions whatsoever. I think that'd be a mistake if I'm Charlotte
Yeah.
personally, just because I feel like Scoot. Again, I like Miller, but I feel like Scoot is the more
Scoot
right
is
now
generational.
yeah, I think he's the more talented guy. I think you've said at times, right? You feel like Miller may be more ready right away. But again,
He's a knockdown shooter. I understand Charlotte's thinking, but I just don't think that warrants passing on Scoot Henderson from Brandon Miller. I don't think you can compare the two in terms of impact on the game. But Miller's a great player, and he's not even in the
yeah,
league yet. I already know that he's going to be a knockdown shooter. He can get to his spots, but and he's probably a really good fit next to Lamelo. Sure, that's great, and the rest of the guys on Charlotte. But Scoot, he's just I'm not trying to glaze, but he's low key close to one of a kind. It's almost it's eerily reminiscent of I guess the best comparison would be a young D Rose or young Russ. Just pure athleticism. The jump shot will get there, I think, but it's tough. It's tough. It's tough.
right, yeah, exactly. Because again, Charlotte, similar to Portland, you're not good enough, to choose the best fit. You got to take the best available. Now, maybe they think Miller's the best available,
Right.
um, over Scoot. But I don't know. Maybe their logic there is okay. We don't need two guards with Lamelo, but again, like Lamelo could play with us. He's playing with Terry Rozier right now, right? And
Exactly.
I feel like if I'm Charlotte, I would definitely rather have Scoot Henderson on a rookie-controlled contract than Terry Rozier, even though
Yeah,
Terry Rozier's not bad.
right.
But again, like I don't know. Maybe Rozier may be difficult to move, but I just again, if you're Charlotte, you can't mess this up, right? This is the first time in a little bit that you've gotten a top 3 draft pick,
Yep.
and I think the last top 5 pick they had, I think was it Zeller? I think it was Cody Zeller, right? And that was a bad draft.
Yeah.
So, you
Yeah.
just there wasn't a whole lot you could do there,
Right.
right? But, this is a good draft and you have one
You
of the
need to
top
pick
3
good.
picks, right? And most people feel like, the top 3 guys are all going to be really good in some way, shape, or form.
Right.
You can't mess this one up. You have the second pick. We know when Banyama's going 1. So take the next best guy available, please.
Exactly. I think that's the smart way to operate.
Yeah. Yeah, and then like I said, with the Lillard thing, we talked about on our live stream where we mentioned some teams that would be interesting, right? Where like Heat's, net that kind of makes sense, right? Because on those teams, he's probably the go-to guy. I guess
Right.
Butler could still be the guy, right? But Lillard, because he's a point guard with the ball in his hands, you feel like it would probably be more in his hands than Butler down the stretch.
And he has rapport
But
with Bam. I think he said Bam is one of his close friends, one of his quote unquote
yeah,
dogs. I think that's what he said. I don't want to misquote him, but I think that is what he said. And he also said Mikal Bridges too. So there is
yeah,
some
exactly.
chemistry, I guess. But I'm curious. I think those are
Yeah,
pretty good fits because, like you said, he will become the guy.
yeah, and I think that's what he would want.
Yeah,
Because we know in Portland, he's the guy right now, clearly. Pretty much the only guy, right? Because I don't think
pretty
Portland
much.
has really any other teams at all in terms of sports. I mean, I guess in Oregon you have the college team, right? The Ducks, but
Yeah,
outside of that, I mean, like,
I don't think they had. They definitely don't have an NFL team.
yeah. So I mean, at
Yeah.
this point, he's pretty much. It's kind of like it's kind of funny because like say with the Wizards, right? Like,
Sure.
I mean, obviously they have other sports teams, but I feel
Yeah.
like Beal is probably the most famous right now of the Washington athletes, right?
Yeah, yeah. At one
Yeah,
point, the Nationals they had baseball with like Soto, but he's no
yeah,
longer on our
he's
team.
gone.
But
Yeah, so
and like I'm trying to think with the Commanders. I mean, normally your quarterback is your guy, but I feel like our wide receiver core is probably the more um I guess notable players on our squad. So yeah, I feel like Beal is definitely the guy, and before Beal it was definitely Wall. So I get it. I get it.
yeah. Shams Charania just reported not too long ago Kentucky's Chris Livingston has
Yeah, I saw
canceled
that.
all 7 of his remaining workouts, fueling belief that he's received a draft promise. Yeah, so I guess like that would kind of be interesting. I'm not as familiar
Hmm.
with his game. Obviously, we know Kentucky has a really you know good track record in terms of producing a lot of high quality NBA guys. But
Yeah.
again, like we've seen like we saw Scoot cancel workouts, for some other
Oh
teams.
yeah.
So
This
yeah,
happens.
exactly. So this is yeah, exactly. So that's not anything new. And again, like you don't want to put yourself in a negative position, right? So, obviously it makes sense that these guys are doing what they're doing. Um, Another one we got Harden on Suns radar. Ramona Shelburne says Phoenix's destination to keep your eye on for Harden. I don't know how they get him.
It's not happening.
Um, I guess that would have to be, I guess, some type of sign and trade, right?
Right.
I guess, but again, why would Philly do that? I mean, I guess it would have to be Chris Paul, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know about that one. I like I said, it's kind of like the Kyrie LeBron thing where like I said, I buy that Durant would want Harden in Phoenix. I just don't necessarily know how they would realistically get him. And Shams, it sounds like he's saying that he thinks Harden is torn between Houston or Philly, right? So we think he's probably going to be with one of those two teams. I don't see the Phoenix one making a lot of sense. I mean, it would be interesting. I guess it would be an
Sure.
upgrade from Paul. But still, like, I just don't see how realistic that is. I just feel
Yeah.
like we've heard so many rumors about the Houston thing that it's probably
It,
going to
it
be either
it's
that
got
or
to be
he goes back to
Houston.
Philly.
It's got to be Houston or Philly, in my opinion.
Yeah,
And with the Suns, I feel like it could be a fit, but at the same time, we've also seen Kevin Durant and Harden together, and that didn't work out due to injury, of course, but and
yeah. I think if
also
they were
off the
healthy, I
court
think
drama too. But when they
yeah,
were both healthy, I think it was a good deal. But at the same time, you're also giving up you're giving up a player, I guess, who hasn't been, generally that great in playoffs sometimes, and then you're also getting another player that tends to flame out in the playoffs. So I don't know if that's, the greatest move. So I would probably assume that that's,
and again,
yeah,
if Phoenix does that, they're hard cap. So that's another
exactly.
situation
So
where again, it puts
yeah,
you in a
I doubt that
situation.
happens.
Yeah. Another rumor: Raptors. They got they're eyeing 3 head coaching candidates according to Mark Stein.
Mhm.
Sergio Scariolo, Kenny
Never heard of
Atkinson,
him.
and
Okay.
Darko Rahakovic, I
Okay.
guess. Rajakovic.
All
Yeah,
right.
I'm not familiar with I'm only familiar with Kenny Atkinson.
Me as well.
The other guys I believe are coaching in the EuroLeague. I think
Oh, that'd be
Scariolo is coaching
interesting.
in Italy. Yeah,
Hmm.
he's an older guy. I think he's in his 60s.
Okay.
Whereas Rajakovic, I believe he's in his 40s.
Right.
If either of those guys were to coach, they would be the second European born coaches
Mhm.
in NBA history. I think the first one was Igor Kokosov. I think the
Okay.
one that coached for Phoenix for that one
Yeah, yeah,
year.
yeah.
Again, like I said, I'm just not familiar with these other guys.
Me
So
neither.
I mean, Atkinson, like I said, personally, I'm not as big of a fan of his as some others are.
Really?
Uh, yeah, I don't know. I mean, like, I understand again that for like a rebuilding young team, I guess it maybe might make sense, but I
Okay.
don't know. I've never really been a huge fan of his. I mean, again, I just that's just my personal opinion, but
Sure.
his name has come up so much that it feels like he's probably due, to get another opportunity as a head coach. But, again, if these guys have good track records, maybe they get it. Because we've heard a lot of different names, a ton of different names for Toronto's job.
Yeah.
I mean, they've been asking, I think, everybody, right? They were asking guys that had, recently gotten hired, as well as like, assistants, that we haven't heard of.
Wasn't Reddick's
Obviously,
name thrown in there too?
yeah, JJ Redick,
Like,
I think
yeah,
even like Becky Hammond, like so they're asking everybody.
they're desperate.
So I have no idea who gets that job. But clearly they're leaving no stone unturned, which again, I guess that's what you want
It's
to
the right
do when
approach.
you're searching for a head coach. So I do wonder who they pick. Um, I the wording of the article, I mean, I'm not sure if that automatically means those are the 3 finalists.
Right.
Um, but if it is, right, then I guess it'll be interesting.
Yeah.
And then I guess to kind of wrap it up, so Showtime Sports, they're going to do a docu-series on, Hall of Famer, all-time great Wilt Chamberlain.
Okay.
This one kind of caught me off guard because reportedly, they're also going to recreate his voice using AI, so that's kind of weird.
Mm,
Um,
I don't like
I
that.
mean, I could see, yeah, it's a 3-part docu-series set to debut July 14th,
Mhm.
produced by Religion of Sports. And like I
Okay.
said, they're gonna use AI to recreate his voice as it tells his story using archival footage from his estate.
Okay.
So
Well,
the
that's pretty
story's
cool.
gonna span from yeah, exactly. So the story's gonna span from his time, in Philly's Overbrook High School to his NBA career,
Cool.
to his death in 1999. One of the producers is KG, right? So obviously,
Okay,
we
cool.
know he's talked about Wilt at different times, um, and his impact, I guess, on the game, as an athlete. So it's gonna be interesting. Um, but, and then they also mentioned it's going to draw on different perspectives, right? Pat Riley, Jerry West, Bill Walton.
Cool.
I think they mentioned Lisa Leslie, Rick Barry, Oscar Robertson. So it's going to be interesting. I'm curious how they do the AI thing, how
Right.
accurate it's going to be. 'Cause I haven't necessarily, seen AI necessarily use like to recreate voices, from like older eras.
Right,
I
right,
know a
right.
lot of people use AI for more like, current people, individuals in terms of recreating their voices. I haven't seen as many for guys like Wilt Wright, where all of the footage of him talking would be from, much, older era. So
Right.
it's interesting. It's kind of bizarre, but
Yeah.
again, he is an all-time great, so it makes sense, to do something on him. Um, because again, like we've seen, you know, we've heard a decent amount about him, but at the same time, you also don't necessarily always see a lot, right? Because in the era he played in,
Right.
you didn't have a ton of footage of him, so it's always kind of interesting when they do docu series on some of these older athletes, guys that did contribute
Right.
to the history of the
For
game.
sure. Yeah. I feel like that's probably going to be a really insightful documentary. I'm going to check it out for sure. But, I obviously have my questions about the AI. I've seen plenty of documentaries and even like videos in museums where they kind of just hire a voice actor to try and imitate, what the person may have sounded like, But, I mean, it's, I'm going to watch
Yeah,
it
like the
probably.
LeBron movie, right?
Yeah. Like, and I'm going to watch it. Obviously, I'm gonna watch the docu series, but I'm probably gonna feel a little uncomfortable and uneasy, hearing an artificially intelligent, render of Wilt Chamberlain's voice talking to me. I don't know.
I
That's
wonder
just
if
gonna
they're
be like, ugh,
yeah, and then I also kind of wonder if they're gonna get into some of the personal stuff. That would
right?
be
Because
kind
he
of
lived a
interesting. 'Cause I
wild
feel like
lifestyle, man.
yeah, because I feel like that isn't normally discussed as much, like,
Right?
when they're doing documentaries or talking about him, but, again, if it's about his life, I feel like that part probably is gonna have to be discussed, but, it'll be
Yeah.
interesting to see. Like I
I'm
said, I'll
curious. I
probably
think
plan
KG's gonna do it or do it well. You know.
yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, that's it for today's episode of Off Ball Takes. Again, a lot of big content, a lot of content to discuss. Insightful content, right? About of course, the NBA Finals, things going on around the league. Of course, just a reminder, we are going to do a live stream following Game 4 of the NBA Finals.
Yep.
Right. So that I guess that's Friday night.
Yep.
So be ready to join us in the chat room, right? The last live stream we had, a decent amount of conversation back and forth,
Yeah, it was really
between the
good.
people in the chat room. Yeah, exactly. So, that helps us and it helps, the viewers as well, right? Because that makes for more interesting and entertaining content when
Hmm.
we interact with everyone. So don't forget that. As we mentioned before, don't forget to like and subscribe and follow our socials. So thanks for listening, and we'll either see you on the live stream Friday or we'll see you for our next podcast on Monday.